The 20 most important classic Japanese cars. Explore 20 legendary Japanese cars that redefined the automotive industry with their innovation, reliability, and timeless design. From the Toyota Supra to the Nissan Skyline GTR, these classics continue to inspire car enthusiasts worldwide. 20. Toyota Corolla GT AE86, 1983 to 1988. Average market value, 21,017 The Toyota Corolla GT AE86 deserves a chapter of its own. The Corolla GT AE86's list of accomplishments runs long and deep. That's the ode to the car's nimble handling, responsive steering, and a 1.6-liter twin-cam engine. All of that came together to make the AE86 one of the best driving cars in the market, and a go-to car for racers and drifters alike. Speaking of drifters, no less than Keiichi Tsuchiya, better known as the Drift King, drove the AE86 to reach his status as one of the greatest drifters of all time. As accomplished as the AE86 is, you can argue that the model's greatest claim to fame is its starring role in Initial D, one of the most popular manga comic series of its era. To this day, the Toyota GT AE86 remains a hot ticket item among fans and collectors. Good luck trying to find a good condition AE86 today. If you do, prepare to shell out at least $21,600 for it. The good news is that spare parts are readily available. Toyota Gazoo Racing's heritage parts division manufactures and exports parts for iconic classic cars like the AE86. 19. Toyota Land Cruiser J40, 1961 to 1985. Average market value, $37,080. Not every car on this list is of the performance variety. It's a testament to the J40's stature as one of the greatest SUVs of all time that Toyota produced the model from 1960 to 2001. That's over 40 years of the same model, hitting the market without interruption. Production of the J40 ended in most regions in the mid-1980s, but continued in Brazil until the early 2000s under the nameplate Bandeirante. The Land Cruiser J40's popularity also spurred numerous iterations, including the FJ40 and the 2FJ40. Through it all, the Land Cruiser J40 withstood more than just the test of time. It's also become one of the most sought-after classic SUVs in the world. Despite evolving steadily throughout its production run, the J40 remained virtually the same for over 2 decades. Therefore, as long as the car you want to buy is in good condition, you shouldn't worry much about the year of production. All J40s made were tough as nails. 18. Mazda Cosmo, 1967 to 1996. Average market value, $66,575. When you mention the word Cosmo to car enthusiasts, a lot of them will immediately remember what is arguably one of the most important Japanese sports cars in history. But the Cosmo's true claim to fame is its stature as one of the first production cars to feature a 2-rotor Wankel rotary engine. The single-piston engine took the industry by storm when it was introduced. The rotary engine was not only smaller and lighter than conventional engines, but it also produced more power and had a higher revving capacity than standard engines of that time. The history of Mazda's Wankel rotary engine will always be tied to the Cosmo, making the latter one of the most important vehicles, not only of its era, but the overall history of cars. The achingly beautiful first-gen Cosmo is the most desirable and most expensive Cosmo model, with asking prices sometimes crossing $100,000. The other generations are more reasonably priced, including the luxurious Unos Cosmo, which closed out the nameplate's production run. 17. Honda Civic, 1972 to 1979. Average market value, $11,116. Every model that has made it big in the industry has roots in a time when automakers were just trying to make an impact in the business. That sentiment holds for a lot of models these days, none more so than Honda's super popular Civic compact sedan. At that time, Honda needed an economical, durable, and affordable car to beef up its automotive lineup after initially finding success in the motorcycle segment. That's when the Civic came into the picture. It wasn't the fastest car by any stretch of the imagination, nor was it the fanciest ride that money could buy, but it checked a lot of requirements that Honda needed for an affordable ride. It's not a coincidence that the Civic turned into Honda's first commercially successful vehicle. Since then, it's become one of the most identifiable vehicles in the entire auto industry. It's even evolved from a cheap subcompact to a sophisticated compact vehicle that's teeming with a lot of Honda's newest technologies. The Civic is still going strong 10 generations later and is one of the top hot hatchbacks on sale. 16. Datsun 240Z 1970 Mai. Average market value 34,811s. What else has to be said about the Datsun 240Z that hasn't been said already? Also dubbed the Fair Lady Z, it arrived in 1970, a time when safety regulations effectively placed domestic performance cars in a state of flux. As people started to look elsewhere to satiate their thirst for vehicular performance, the 240Z arrived like manna from the skies, packing a 2.4-liter straight-six SOHC engine that produced a stout 151 horsepower. It helped, too, that the 240Z stood out from the crowd with a drop-dead sexy design that reminded folks of exotic European cars of that era. From the Porsche headlights to the Jaguar body to the Aston Martin profile, the 240Z was an affordable performance car that looked way more upscale than it actually was. American car buyers gravitated towards the 240Z like moths to a light, and to this day, the Fair Lady remains a hot ticket item among car collectors and enthusiasts. Nevertheless, $35,000 seems fair for a car dubbed the Japanese 911. Though it had a relatively short production period, it was a very popular car. Therefore, you won't struggle to find a good example. 15. Toyota 2000 GT, 1967 to 1970. Average market value, $1.1 million. Much like Honda, Toyota wasn't the car brand that it is now. There once was a time when the Japanese auto giant was an obscure automaker with dreams of selling cars in the US in small quantities. One of its models, the 2000 GT, was a small but peppy Japanese sports coupe that sported an underrated six-cylinder engine. Its arrival in foreign markets, the US most notably, helped put Toyota on the map. Not only did it look astonishingly sexy, but the aforementioned Yamaha-built six-cylinder unit delivered impressive performance capabilities to go with race car-like handling credentials. It's an understatement to say that Toyota struck gold with the 2000 GT. Toyota didn't sell too many 2000 GTs in the US, but it did do something far more important than putting money in the automaker's coffers. It introduced Toyota to a region that would end up becoming the automaker's largest market in the world. That's called impact, folks. 14. Nissan Skyline 2000 GTR Hakosuka 1968 to 1972. Average market value $122,028. When you're talking about Japanese performance cars, no name can elicit swoons and over-the-top gasps like the Nissan Skyline GTR. The OG Skyline GTR looked more like an American muscle car than a Japanese sports car. But underneath the boxy profile and the squared lines sat a 2.0-liter six-cylinder engine that produced 160 horsepower, enough to turn heads back in the late 1960s. The Nissan Skyline GTR will always be one of the greatest automotive marvels Japan has ever produced. That it was never imported to America has made it that much more expensive and highly collectible among car collectors the world over. Remember, whenever we talk about the car we know as Godzilla today, proper homage must go to the Hakosuka as well. Getting a genuine Hakosuka made by Nissan isn't easy. The company made only 1945 examples. The number of original Hakosuka surviving must surely be lower. If you don't mind purchasing an imitation, Hakosuka replicas are easier to find. 13. Isuzu 117 Coupe, 1968 to 1981. Average market value, 34,100. Not a lot of people remember Isuzu as a car maker, but back in the 60s, Isuzu built some ravishing car models, including the 117 Coupe. You didn't expect a Japanese automaker back then to come out with a coupe that carried stylish curves and swooping lines, but that's exactly what Isuzu did when it rolled out the 117 Coupe. Of course, the real secret here is that the 117 was actually penned by Georgette Giugiaro, which explains the car's aesthetics. Isuzu enjoyed a lot of success with the 117 at the helm. Production lasted until 1981, and while the Coupe wasn't exactly a bastion of performance, it was elegant in ways very Japanese cars were back then. Good luck finding a well-maintained Isuzu 117 Coupe these days. They are some of the rarest examples on the used car market. 12. Mazda Loose 1800, 1970. Average market value, 6,000. The Mazda 1800 Loose wasn't a powerful car, and it certainly wasn't a fast one either. In top form, the sedan was powered by a 1.8-liter engine that barely produced 100 horsepower. You're not going to win a lot of races in the 1800 Loose. That much is certain. So why is this model on this list? For all intents and purposes, the Loose was one of the first models introduced by Mazda when it entered the US market in the early 1970s. Like the Civic in Honda's case, the Loose gave Mazda credibility and recognition outside its home market, and the Japanese automaker has built on that credibility since then. On top of that, the Loose also remains one of the best-looking Japanese cars ever built. That's a credit to Mazda's decision to venture to Europe and have the famous Italian design house Bertone pen the design of the Loose. Once Mazda's top car in the United States, the 1800 Loose has faded into obscurity. Though it looked good, it was so slow that it failed to excite buyers or the media. It spent 1 year on the market before being replaced by the second-gen Loose, which sold stateside as the RX4 and featured a Wankel mill. 11. Mitsubishi Lancer 1600 GSR 1973 to 1976. Average market value, $35,000. Mitsubishi Lancer is one of the most iconic nameplates when it comes to Japanese performance cars. When combined with the Evolution moniker, the Lancer is a formidable rally car for the road. But the Lancer went rallying long before the Evo came to be. In 1973, Mitsubishi introduced the first-generation Lancer, internally dubbed A70. The brand's rally aspirations spawned the Mitsubishi Lancer 1600 GSR. In Europe, the car was sold as the Colt 1600 GSR, while the US got a rebadged, non-performance version called the Chrysler Valiant Lancer. The car was made to race off-road, and propulsion was entrusted to a 1.6-liter inline-4 with 169 horsepower and 119 pound-feet. While street versions were less powerful, this is the Japanese classic car that paved the way for all of Mitsubishi's future rally models, including all generations of the Lancer Evolution. The 1600 GSR was significant for Mitsubishi as it helped build the automaker's motorsport pedigree. It won the grueling Safari Rally on its first attempt. Road-going versions were less successful, probably because emission regulations forced Mitsubishi to detune the car's engine. Toyota Celica, 1971-2006. Average market value, $14,201. As much love as the Toyota Supra has received, it's worth mentioning that it wasn't the only performance car that helped Toyota become a big player in the global car scene. For those who couldn't afford the admittedly pricey 2000 GT, Toyota built a budget-friendly sports coupe that still carried a performance vibe to it. Enter the Toyota Celica. The first-generation Celica arrived in 1970, and the model immediately took off. It lasted 7 generations, spanning 36 years, before Toyota shelved the nameplate in 2006. More than its longevity, the Celica proved that Toyota was also capable of offering an affordable performance model that allowed owners to enjoy the thrill of a Japanese-built sports coupe without having to pay too much of a premium for it. To date, the Celica remains popular among car aficionados, so much so that rumors of a return are never far from the surface. 9. Honda S500, 1963-1964. Average market value, NA. In the past, Honda was known solely for its motorcycles. In 1963, the Japanese car maker introduced its first sports car, the Honda S500. The compact, nimble sports car came as a soft-top convertible or a fastback coupe. This was not just the first sports car from Honda, but also its first passenger car. The S500 is the first of 3 versions and features a 5-liter V1cc, 0.5-liter, inline-4 with 44 horsepower. The S600 came a year later and was the most high-revving version of the car. With a 9,500 RP redline, it was the most high-revving road-going car for many decades, and even today, very few cars manage to top that. Honda's motorcycle roots were firmly embedded in the small sports car since the rear axle was chain-driven. Honda silenced anyone who doubted the company's vehicle manufacturing prowess with the S500. It was one of the most beautiful, it is still a very pretty car, and most technologically advanced cars of the time. It set the tone for future Honda roadsters like the iconic Mazda 2010. Honda built around 1 on 360 examples, which makes the S500 quite rare. They seldom appear on the used car market. 8. Mitsubishi Pajero, 1983-2021. Average market value, $15,600. Toyota's Land Cruiser may be the definitive Japanese off-roader, but from 1981, it shared the off-road scene with Mitsubishi's Pajero. Nowadays, the Pajero is a more budget-friendly alternative to the Land Cruiser, but in truth, Mitsubishi's off-road model was a lot more consistent in Rally Dakar, where it saw great success. When it came to the regular versions sold to the public, the Pajero was sold as a 5-door or a 3-door short-wheelbase SUV. 4x4 was always standard, and the Pajero came with a variety of petrol and diesel units. The range-topping variant introduced the 6G72 engine, which was most notably used in the Mitsubishi 3000 GTO in Japan. Mitsubishi is no stranger to partnering with Chrysler, and between 1987 and 1989, the first-generation Pajero was sold in the U.S. as the Dodge Raider. Regardless, the boxy Japanese SUV marked the beginning of a long lineup of rugged Mitsubishi off-roaders, among which the legendary Pajero Evolution. Out of 7. Subaru Leon, 1972-1994. Average market value, $6,153. Subaru is mostly known for its rally-bred Legacy and Impreza models that dominated WRC throughout the years. However, the brand occasionally dipped into the sports Coupe A segment. First introduced in 1971, the Leon was a front-wheel drive model that came in 3 generations. 4-wheel drive was always optional and, in true Subaru fashion, only flat-4 engines were available. The first and second generation Subaru Leon also introduced a pickup version called the Brat. The third-generation Leon came in 1980 and was the first Subaru to enter the World Rally Championship. The rally team was led by Noriyuki Koseki, who would later found Subaru Tecnica International, STI. The Leone would eventually be succeeded by the Legacy, which in turn was replaced by the Impreza STI in Subaru's rally efforts. Despite being Subaru's top model for several years, the Leone is quite cheap today, especially compared to its more famous rally-bred stablemates. 6. Mitsubishi Colt Galant GTO 1970 to 1977. Average market value, $6,600. The Galant nameplate first arrived in 1969 and is typically associated with the brand's most luxurious sedans. Granted, Mitsubishi is rarely associated with luxury, but in 1970, the Galant GTO arrived as the brand's first model, officially recognized as a Grand Tourer. GTO stands for Gran Turismo Omologato and is considered to be the rarest of the Colt Galant models. It was also a homologation special for the JCCA, but the OPEC oil embargo from 1973 meant the car would never see a racing circuit. Like other Japanese coupes from the time, the Galant GTO resembled a downsized American muscle car. Instead of torquey V8 engines, Mitsubishi's coupe came with inline-4 engines ranging from 1.6 to 2.0 liters. The MR edition was the range topper, powered by a 4G52 engine with 125 horsepower. The Galant GTO is Mitsubishi's first luxury sports car and would pave the way for future models like the GTO RS3000 GT. Mitsubishi opted against marketing the car aggressively outside Japan. The few examples available stateside don't cost much. In Japan, however, the GTO is highly sought after and very pricey. 5. Toyota Supra A70, 1987 to 1992. Average market value, $23,576. The Supra name dates back to 1978, but it wasn't until 1986 that the Supra became its own model. Before that, the Supra name was designated for a souped-up version of the Celica. The third generation, internally dubbed A70, effectively split up the Celica and Supra names and gave us a proper sports car flagship from Toyota. It's not the first turbocharged Supra, nor the first one to get an inline-6, but it was the first to give us the 1JZ GTE engine. The range-topping engine was the 7M GTE, which can be considered the predecessor to the 2JZ GTE. The 7M GTE also had great tuning potential, but needed a few things in order to make it reliable before going for big power. The 7M is also the first Toyota inline-6 engine to utilize ignition coils instead of a distributor. Having long lived under the shadow of the MK4 Supra, the A70 is starting to prove that it also deserves the adulation that its successor receives. Though it lacks the MK4's hardy 2JZ engine, the MK3 has enormous tuning potential. MK3 examples are not as pricey as MK4 cars, for now. We advise that you get one stat before demand for the MK3 shoots up, raising prices. 4. Mazda RX3, 1971 to 1978. Average market value, $43,550. Mazda has always taken a different approach, and this couldn't be more obvious when looking at the brand's flagship performance cars. That's because every flagship sports car from Mazda was powered by a rotary engine, which is what gave the unique driving characteristics of the cars. Mazda's sports cars were always about lightness and balance instead of high-tech wizardry. The RX3, which was marketed as the Savannah in its home market, Japan, was nicknamed the Rotary Rocket. In addition to being quick for its day, among the RX3's biggest feats is that it ended the Hakosuka Skyline GTR's winning streak in motorsports. It also laid the foundation for future Mazda rotary sports cars, such as the RX-7 lineup. The RX-3's not-so-secret weapon was lightness. Despite emerging during a time when car potentials were hamstrung by the oil crisis, the Mazda established itself as a champion on track. Its success, coupled with the fact that it has a rotary engine up front, has made it a relatively pricey collectible. 3. Mitsubishi Starion, 1982 to 1989. Average market value, $17,801. The first instance of badge engineering dates back to 1917, but its most notable practice in the automotive world comes from the Japanese car makers during the 1970s to 2000s. Badge engineering was a great way for Japanese car makers to go around the import quotas imposed by the U.S. government. The Mitsubishi Starion is one of the first cars to be badge engineered. It happened through a joint venture between Chrysler and Mitsubishi called Diamond Star Motors, DSM, which essentially allowed Chrysler to sell the Japanese model branded as the Plymouth Dodge Conquest. The Japanese coupe was quite potent for the time and even featured turbocharged engines with up to 197 horsepower. The Starion was also the Japanese answer to the Porsche 924. An interesting fact about the Starion is that no one is quite sure how it got its name. 2. Nissan Skyline GTR R32, 1989-1994. Average market value, $43,346. The Nissan Skyline GTR conquered motorsports on more than one occasion, and it was the R32 GTR whose dominance was the most absolute. It entered every race it won and was eventually banned from racing since driving a GTR was considered cheating. It also prompted the creation of the Australian V8 supercar racing series, which naturally excluded the GTR. All that earned the R32 GTR the nickname Godzilla. This was the first time Nissan deployed the Atessa ETS all-wheel drive system, which was revolutionary for the time, and the first time we saw the RB26 DEET engine in action, two elements that would become the staple for GTRs to come. To this day, the Nissan GTR is considered one of the most legendary, capable, and modified cars on the planet, and it all started with the 1989 Skyline R32. We have even gone as far as christening the RT2 the greatest performance car of all time. 1. Mazda MX5, 1999-2023. Average market value, $14,300. The Mazda MX-5 Miata is now old enough to be officially classified as a classic car, but in many ways it has been a classic for quite a while. The MX-5 is one of the best examples of the Japanese taking an existing formula and perfecting it. The birthplace of the lightweight sports car is considered Britain, but in the past, anything that was made there wasn't particularly reliable. Mazda effectively reinvented the British lightweight roadster in 1989, which resulted in one of the most popular and affordable sports cars money can buy. No wonder, by the end of 1990, over 150,000 examples were made. 5 generations later, the Miata still adheres to the same principles of simplicity and lightness. Moreover, the MX-5's success prompted other car makers to dig around the parts bin and create their own lightweight convertibles from existing models, such as the BMW Z3 and Mercedes SLK.